Well, good evening and welcome to EVC The Meeting Place. We are ecstatic that you've decided to join us for our live panel tonight as we conclude African Heritage Month here at EVC The Meeting Place. This has been an incredible month of celebration, and we thank you for setting aside the time. At home, we have those who are here live with us this evening, but we have many of you online, and we thank you for being in our virtual space. Again, thank you from our leadership team. Thank you for your willingness to take part in this listening circle. The African Heritage Month theme for 2021 is Black History Matters. During the month of February, we sought to recognize and celebrate the important legacy of people of African descent and the long-standing history in the development of Canada. As diverse as our country is, countless racialized citizens in this country continue to experience the challenges of being isolated, marginalized, ostracized from mainstream society. During this month, we have been called to listen, to learn, to share, and to act. When you listen well with your ears and heart, we affirm the stories being told. Beloved, in preparing for tonight's panel, I came across a quote, this quote on social media. It's a privilege to learn about racism instead of experiencing it your whole life. Selah. We are blessed here at EVC to have Owen Osaun Lee as our Minister of Music. He has blessed us throughout the years, but last year was a defining moment. Last year, he presented a music video entitled Listen. The message is timely, powerful, and very insightful. I invite you now to watch, to receive the message, and to listen.
If the Lord is with us, why then has all of this happened to us? We've been in brokenness so long, we don't even see ourselves healed. We've been sad so long, we don't even see ourselves rejoicing and happy. So many of us been in it so long, we don't think we can see ourselves out of it.
Look, same struggle, just a different day. Still request an ID when I gotta pay. Still use different civics on the resume, cause we know that community names make them look away. I pray to God someone listens. We don't play no race cards, dog, it's the life that we're living. Casual police checks, we all fit the description. Minorities in the streets, so how we rule in the prison? I don't get it. Black skin and brown eyes got me stigmatized. The media don't televise lest somebody dies. They feeding us premium lies by the supersize. That's how we grow desensitized to a mother's cry. It happens way too often. Front row up in the church, sun up in the coffin. Hands up, God, we suffer too many losses. More rallies, more riots, more city marches. And that cop that took his life, you know they dropped the charges. Chalked it up to ghetto dog, just another target. Man, this cycle keeps repeating and I'm getting nauseous. Got me praying for my sons, we gotta be cautious. I wanna be off this, but there's no ways out. We came a long way, but still a long ways out. I've been praying for change, but I'm all prayed out. Got my fist up in the sky, cause I want change now. My mama told me there'd be days like this. Daddy done warned me I would feel like this. As I get older, I'm feeling colder, but I don't wanna live a life like this. I just gotta speak my truth and I hope you listen. Yeah, I'm just trying to seek refuge from the life we live in. Yeah.
There has to be more to life than what I'm currently experiencing.
Tired of begging for
God
change.
said that he would be beauty for my ashes. God said that he would not withhold any good thing from me.
Look, I stand tall, my head facing the steeple, fighting tears thinking about the struggle of my people. Generations of forefathers looking for a breakthrough with nothing left but God and faith to hold on to. Robbed of freedom, stripped of pride, some holding on to life and others living to die. They gave us little to nothing, but we took it in stride. Turned nothing into something, found the strength to survive. Turned survival into triumph, through the ashes we rise. Yeah, we found strength that we had embedded inside. Underneath the melanin lies rejection and pain, but don't forget about the history that flows through our veins. Stories of what was, what is to come. Redemption for black fathers, freedom for black sons, maroons, black loyalist slaves. They all won through the successions of sons we fighting to overcome. Yeah, bumping Sam Cooke up in the subwoofer. Now is not the time to be an onlooker. If my people unified and we'll begin to mobilize, and they gon' see the heat rising like a slow cooker. And there's no days out. We came a long way, but still a long ways out. I've been praying for change, but I'm all prayed out. Got my fist up in the sky, cause I want change now. My mama told me there'd be days like this. Daddy done warned me I would feel like this. As I get older, I'm feeling colder, but I don't wanna live a life like this. Gotta speak my truth and I hope you listen. Yeah, I'm just trying to seek refuge from the life we live in. Yeah.
Wow, what a gift we have in this house in the person of Owen O. Soundly. We thank God for the gift and the anointing that is so evident upon his life. Well, beloved, you didn't come to hear me talk all night. We have a live panel. They are live. They're breathing. They're smiling. What? Looking cute and stuff. Y'all see me every Sunday. Listen, turn the channel. You know what I'm saying? No. Stay right here with us. Tonight, we have our members, our family members, willing to put some of their brokenness on display. We have family members willing to share what it means to be in this skin, in this province. I had a friend write a thesis entitled Black in Blue Nose. What does it mean to be black in Blue Nose? And so tonight is my great honor and privilege to present to some and introduce to others our panelists. These are members that have served behind the scenes on so many. I did not ask them for a proper introduction, so I'm gonna stumble through this. But again, they said, don't talk long, let us talk. Okay, so here's how I'm gonna summarize it. To my left, what? The Mrs. Anderson? Yeah, I'm a little biased, y'all. This is my sweetheart. Dr. Casey Monroe Anderson is a mother, a sister, a daughter. She's an educator. Yes. And she's a wife. Don't forget it. She's a wife. All right. She serves as the first lady of this house and has served Emmanuel well. Most recently, she received the appointment as the newly appointed Deputy Minister of Communities, Culture, and Heritage for the province of Nova Scotia. She's going to tell me to summarize and just be quiet. So that is Dr. Casey Monroe Anderson, and she's going to share momentarily. Right beside her, we have Brother Joshua Paris, one of our most active youth in this church. We thank God for his charisma, for his fortitude. This brother is going places. Y'all need to keep an eye on him. Yes, he's a son. He's a brother. He's a high school student. He's an athlete, and he brings it to the court, a baller. Par excellent. I won't even go to all the other sports that Joshua participates, but he's going to share from a youth perspective tonight. This is a man behind the scenes, Mr. Joseph McCarthy. Joseph will be the one in charge of our drama and our arts and all those productions, all the staging and things. Listen, this is a creative soul. We thank God for him. He is a husband, a son. You will hear he's a parent, and he's going to share what it is to be even in a biracial relationship in this province. You're going to hear his heart tonight. Beside him, Brother Sean Mantley. Listen, I can say a lot, but this is being recorded, so I'm going to keep it brief. He is a faithful member of our church. He's a coach. He's a mentor in the community. He volunteers at Souls Harbor, looking for those that are less fortunate than ourselves. He is a father to 2 amazing sons, and he continues to give back. Last week, we saw his gift in puppeteering, right? And we're going to bring him out of retirement. Last but not least, is my sister, my friend, my co-pastor, the assistant pastor of EBC, the meeting place, the Reverend Andrea M. Anderson. Yes, married to my fam. And listen, this is an anointed woman of God. We thank God for her and for the offices that she holds in and throughout this church. She oversees all of our ministries. She trains all of our leaders and heads of ministry, equipping them for succession, pouring into them so as they pour into others. I'm so glad that she served as director, executive director of human resources, and now is the newly appointed public service commissioner for the province of Nova. We brought out the heavyweights tonight, y'all. All right, you ready? You ready? You feeling the energy? I get to listen for once. Thank you, Jesus. And so the format for tonight is I gave them each 3 to 4 minutes. Let's see if they're like Pastor Leonard J. Anderson. They have 3 to 4 minutes to just give us a little snapshot about themselves, and then y'all submitted many questions. I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, but thank you for participating anonymously by submitting questions for our conversation tonight. I guess my last word would be, this is a listening exercise, not a dialogue. They're going to be speaking to one another, but thank you for being so receptive and having an ear to hear. I'm going to ask Ms. Casey if she would please start us off by just helping us even understand some of the terms that we use when we talk about race and race relations in this subject matter.
Thank you very much, Pastor, and thank you. It's an honor to be here to participate in this panel with these esteemed panelists, and welcome to everyone watching online. Before I start, I believe it would be fitting for us to recognize where we are, that we are on unceded Mi'kmaq territory, and that the lands where we are sitting right now, where we work and where we play, is, unless we are Indigenous people, is not our land. But we think about what reconciliation really means. And in this conversation, we're going to have honesty shared, truth shared. There will be some difficult moments, I presume, as we speak our truth about race and about our experiences. And in the same way, we think about our Indigenous peoples and the injustices that they have endured since the time of the colonial arrival and the impact of those injustices. And we also must remember that we are African people and that we exist in Nova Scotia, the birthplace of African presence in this country. And what that means, over 400 years of African presence, and the many peoples who were brought, enslaved, as well as those who came looking for a better way of life and actually found more racism, more discrimination, and injustices. So for us to have a productive, effective conversation about race and about racism, and specifically about anti-Black racism, which is the focus for tonight, it is important for us to think about and talk about some basic definitions of some basic terms. And the first term is race. Now, panelists, we know that race is salient. Race is in everything, and everything is connected to race. So we can't talk about healthcare without talking about race. We can't talk about education, justice, socioeconomics, employment, the social system, sports, recreation. We can't talk about church without talking about race, or we should not talk about church and the kingdom of God without talking about race. We must be doing business until Christ comes again, and that means us participating in this courageous conversation. So what is race? Race is a human-made, or they are human-made categories created to define groups of people based on physical characteristics like our skin color, hair, texture, etc., ethnicity. And these characteristics result from our ancestry. So since race has been used as a tool to oppress and to inflict violence and hostility on certain groups of people, it is socially and politically a real thing. Over the past 400 years, specifically through physical characteristics that have been connected to intellectual capabilities and to our physical abilities or appearance, what's beautiful and what's not, levels of civilization, who's civilized, who's savage, etc., dehumanizing some races and some people as inferior while advantaging some as superior, we have seen that race has played a major role in dividing humankind. So such ideas have resulted in belief systems and action that created a place, that place, for certain races of people. Certain races of people, particularly people of African descent, are told that we should remain in this particular place, which is an inferior place. These belief systems place white people at the top of the world and the social and the political hierarchy as the race to aspire to, that whiter is better or lighter is smarter, etc. And that whiteness would resemble and represent the superior race, and that every other race would be below it. So that would include indigenous people and black people who would appear at the bottom of that ladder. So even though race is politically and socially a real thing, it's interesting when we talk about race and think about it to understand that it's not a scientific phenomenon. It cannot be biologically proven. And actually, there's very little biological difference between humans. Now, of course, the conditions of racism, the oppressions that people who are racialized, the oppressions that we face, then cause disparities and indicate and cause disparities in health. And that's why we see that certain races, particularly people of African descent, for instance, suffer higher rates, disproportionately higher rates of diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. And that is why race is actually one of the social determinants of health. It's listed amongst many others, including education. So a hierarchy of races, specific categories of people divided or categorized according to our skin color, physical features, and hair, became necessary for white people, particularly white males, to gain and maintain power over black people, brown people, and indigenous people. And that is what they did from the time of around the 1600s. And there's historical evidence for that occurrence, which includes, but it's not limited to, the extermination of indigenous people and what we call the Great Maafa, which is the enslavement of African people through the transatlantic slave trade. So we know, again, we must be mindful that although race is not a biological construct, it is a social and political construct, and because of that, it is a real thing. So such beliefs, when we think about inferiority versus superiority of certain groups, has resulted in this discrimination, this form of discrimination that we call racism. According to the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission and the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act specifically, discrimination means treating an individual or members of a group differently, either intentionally or unintentionally. So it's not only what we do that's intentional, but also that which we do, actions and behaviors that may be unintentional. And it's based on one of the protected characteristics of which race is one under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. And when these actions result in a disadvantage for a member or an entire group of these individuals. Race is protected under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, which means that racism is illegal. And many folks are not aware of that. So racism is prejudice or discrimination directed at someone because of race or because of their color, the color of their skin, and based on that belief that there are certain races that are superior to others. And when we think about anti-Black racism, it refers to prejudices, beliefs, stereotypes, discrimination directed specifically at Black and African people, African descendant people, and which is rooted in our unique histories and experiences of denial of our history, denial of our contributions, and denial of experiences, including colonialism and enslavement, and the legacies of these experiences. Racism is effective because of the power dynamics and the policies, so we think about the rules and the regulations that give more privilege and more power to certain groups, which these groups then use to oppress other groups, like and including people of African descent. Therefore, racism can be individual, it can be based on unconscious bias, conscious bias, and it can result in stereotypes and false assumptions, but it can also be systemic. And that is, for me, one of the most important forms of racism, because many folks are not aware of it. It is institutional and it is systemic, which means it's at the very foundation of the Canadian institutions and practices and policies that we call our own. And finally, what I would like to say is that because racism is institutional and it's systemic, many times people feel or find that they don't believe that it exists because they can't see it. So particularly a white person might be asking, so why haven't I been able to see anti-Black racism at work in Nova Scotia within these systems all this time? You know, I might be older, I might be younger, but I haven't seen it. Why have I not realized that I've been benefiting from these systems and even contributing to the perpetuation of these systems? And that is the key question that I'm thinking we will be answering tonight. And that is because anti-Black racism is ingrained in our systems, in our Canadian society, and in our global society and systems for that matter. And we engage, many people engage in it, benefit from it unknowingly every day in the way we live and do business. So this is the problem. Systemic anti-Black racism, unless we understand it, can be invisible to those who do not experience it, and to those who may in fact be benefiting from it. So let's talk about it. Thank you.
Let's talk about it. Thank you. I need to do a disclaimer and just saying in the back we said we need to frame the conversation, and there are many terms that we don't know, or we use terms and we don't have the proper definition, and so we threw all that responsibility on Lady Kesa to help us understand what are we talking about when we say race, what are we talking about when we say unconscious bias and systemic racism. So thank you for that foundational piece that we needed to have this conversation tonight. Brother Joshua Paris, what you saying, bro?
Thank you, Pastor.
How you doing?
As you know, my name is Joshua Paris. I'm 15 years old and I attend Halifax West High School. I'm in grade 10. My mother is Jamaican and my father's African Nova Scotian. I'm very proud of my history, Jamaican, Nova Scotian.
Yes, sir.
My parents have always taught me from a young age how to advocate for myself and that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I thank them for always having my back. Today I'm going to talk to you about some of my experiences playing sports, going through the school system, and being in my community. So when I was in grade primary, my teacher, I felt that she showed favoritism to some of the other students. A couple students asked to use the bathroom who were white, and she let them go. When I asked, she said I wasn't allowed. But then after me, a couple other white students she asked, and she let them go as well. And at the time, I didn't understand. I was kind of questioning, why am I not allowed, right? Fast forward a couple years, also in elementary, I had a teacher, and she was from England, right? And I guess in England, there's like some common expressions like with monkey references. So she would use monkey references as she's talking and teaching. She would call us cheeky monkeys and silly baboons. And when she said it to me, like, I knew it was wrong. So I told my parents, my mom spoke to her, and then we handled the situation.
I'm sure you did.
When I was in grade 9, I had a teacher who played the movie Forrest Gump, and there's some racial slurs in that movie. So before the racial slurs appeared, she paused the movie and tried to justify how she was going to let them play. So she told us that it was wrong and that we have to acknowledge this history. It's not right today, but it happened then. We have to acknowledge it. So when they played, I was sitting beside my friend who's also black, and a whole class looked at us. And we just felt so uncomfortable. And we were like, why'd she have to single us out like that? the same teacher, she also had very low expectations for me. And she tried to limit me and my potential. So there's an advanced academic program called the Pre-IB program. And there's also the academic program when you go into high school. So I wanted to take the Pre-IB program, and she did not recommend me for it. And I quote, "I don't think you'd be a good candidate for Pre-IB. You'd be a top student at the academic level." And to me, that motivated me to be better. And when I did Pre-IB English, I excelled in it. Also at the school that I was going to in junior high, there was a period of time where the N-word was like a common used word, like every day. So people would always tell me that people were saying this and people were saying that. They were saying it so much they found different languages to say it in, like Arabic and all that kind of stuff. And for a moment there, I became like the N-word police. So then the guidance counselors would have me talk to these students. They'd ask me to talk to these students about and educate them on how wrong it is. And then they also told me that if I wanted to do research on my own time, that I could bring it in and give it to them so that they could better educate themselves and the students. When it's not my responsibility to do that. They're the teacher. They should be the ones that are teaching, right? And it came to at the time, it got so bad that I didn't even want to hear about it. Someone would come up to me and say, "Guess what?" And I'd say, "Bro, don't even tell me. I don't want to hear it." Because it just kind of brings you down, it ruins your day, right? But with that being said, I did, with these negative experiences, I have had some good teachers in the past. And my grade 9 math teacher, he was excellent, he was exceptional. When he would always integrate and incorporate Black history and other cultures into our learning and into the curriculum. And he's a math teacher. And he'd always update us on current events and everything. So I just wanted to give him a shout out. Switching gears to sports, I've been playing soccer and basketball all my life. And on my soccer team, I've always been the only one or one of 2 Black players on the team. And it never really sunk into me that I didn't see myself represented on the team until I got the opportunity to play on an all-Black basketball team. So we were all Black. So just the vibe of the whole vibe was just different, right? So it was at that time when my love for soccer, it exponentially decreased. I didn't see myself reflected. I felt isolated. And the older I got, it became more clear. But when I go to basketball practice, I would just feel there'd be a sense of togetherness. There'd be a sense of belonging. It'd be natural. The chemistry would just flow, right? It'd be camaraderie. So when I go to the mall and stuff with my friends, and I'm out in the community, I don't give reasons for people to say stuff to me. So I don't wear a hood all the time. I don't wear a hood at all, sorry. I don't bring backpacks where I go. If I go into a store, I go in with the intention to buy something, whereas my peers who are white, they don't have to worry about that and be aware of that. In spite of all these negatives, there are 2 things that give me hope are in Psalms 91, verse 11, I know that God gives his angels charge over me to guide me and protect me in all my ways. And also every morning when I thank God, I put the armor of God over me, the helmet of salvation, breastplate of righteousness, sword of the Spirit, shield of faith, belt of truth, in my feet, gospel of the preparations of peace. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Come on. What? My God. I think I found my successor. Yes! Retirement is in view. Thank you for your transparency tonight. Thank you so much for sharing. Brother Joseph McCarthy, would you please take the stage?
Thank you, Pastor. And thank you, Josh. That was enlightening because I see some things in my own story of what you were talking about, but very different because my perspective is a little bit different. So stay with me. My name is Joseph McCarthy. I come from Brookside, Nova Scotia, which is outside of Halifax. Predominantly, when I grew up, my family was the only Black family there, and I come from a mixed race home. So my mom was Black, and my dad is white, and I have a sister as well. So we were the only black people in the community, which was very isolating. But as a child, I didn't have that feeling because as a child, I'm very naive. I always felt very special in the community because everyone knew my name. Everyone knew where I came from, who my parents were, which was nice in a sense. But as time went on, you start to notice that they're taking interest in you in a different way and that those things aren't always positive. So I found myself, I'm reminded by when you're talking about school, I used to wear really bright clothing, like head to toe yellow or head to toe green. And it's weird that I'm reminded of this, but, and I remember a girlfriend I had at the time asked me why I dressed this way. And I remember telling her that so that people would have a reason to look at me. And later on, you know, in life, I realized what I meant by that. It was me trying to take control of why they were looking at me. And at all times, I felt this way. I felt very isolated, which comes down to identity. I always felt like I wasn't part of the black community because I grew up feeling like I was just me. Everyone looks different. I just looked different in a different way. So I was just Joseph McCarthy. But that wasn't what other people saw. Other people saw a black male when that's not what I saw. And a little more context to my family. So my mom didn't have a lot of family around, so I didn't have black family around. We weren't as connected as back when I grew up, even though I'm not super old. I don't like to think of super old anyway, in my 30s. But we weren't very connected. So my connection to black culture, being around black people was extremely limited. Yet, at the same time, blackness was thrust upon me. So finding blackness was very difficult for me, and I didn't learn that until much later on, until high school, and later than that, even university. So it's very interesting that you were able to identify really early and take hold of that and fight for your identity, where I didn't feel like I always did, which is very isolating. Switch gears out of that. So I came from a mixed race home. My wife of 12 years is white, and I have 2 biracial children as well. When thinking about my wife during this preparation, all of the negative experiences that she has endured and noticed and we've spoken about always kept coming back to the feeling of support, actually, oddly, that my wife doesn't see me as a black male. She sees me as her husband and as Joseph McCarthy, which is what I grew up feeling, like it was just me. And not the image of me. And yeah, so I guess shout out to my wife on that one, that I always feel very supported by her talking to me about racism. That said, we do talk about racism fairly often, unfortunately. A common thing that we experience is when we are out together, we are never considered by the general public to be together. And my children are, as you would say, passable. They're not dark. So people in general don't think that they're my children. So when I'm walking around a store, I am constantly being watched, and I always think, are they thinking, why am I watching these children, as if I'm going to take these children when they aren't mine? As well, a common thing is when we go out to buy something or dinner, I'm always considered to be the boyfriend. I'm never considered to be the husband. Even in difficult times within the healthcare system, when I enter the room for appointments, I quite often am stopped. I'm not allowed in because I'm not considered to be part of that family. Anyway, and now switching to my children. My children, what I see in them is the opposite of myself. They are, well, similar in the sense that they're naive to race. However, they want to be a part of it, where I was naive to not knowing that I was a part of something and then wanting to be a part of it. They're wanting to be associated with the black community, and now they're surrounded by black people being part of the church. But yet, when they go to school, they are not considered part of that community, and then they have to be advocates, even at age 11 and age 6, to being part of the black community, being black, and therefore talking to a teacher about Black History Month, that is important to them, and that they don't need to rationalize why that is important to the class when seemingly there are no black children in that class. Yeah. So I feel my heart is heavy on that.
And I thank you. This is weighty, but it's invaluable. We need to hear this truth, because many think it's a dated conversation. But to hear that your children in 2021 still have to advocate for it to even be brought up in their classroom, you know, and that they're an advocate. So thank you, thank you. I know based on these questions, we're gonna hear more. It's been rich already. I hope you all been enjoying it already. It's been rich tonight. Brother Sean, would you please take the mic?
Thank you, Pastor. So my name is Sean Manley. I'm a descendant of Africville. Grew up in Unex Square. When I was growing up, I went to community schools, and to be honest, the teachers I had seemed like they cared, didn't have low expectations of me. But when I went to high school, that's when I really became aware of race. And for those of you who are my age, I'm 50, back in the day we had the Cultural Awareness Youth Group, which, again, was really big on the awareness around being black. And I don't know if there's groups like that now, but, high school and university is when I found that, race was a reality, like, seeing myself as a black man. And I played sports. I played basketball. So basically, you used to get those perceptions from other people about, you're a big, dumb jock. So, fast forward after I finished and worked at the library where I did my puppetry training, I went back to school and did education, and I became an elementary school teacher. And, I wanted to do that because I loved working with kids. And then I became a guidance counselor last 3 or 4 years. And as a guidance counselor, I thought back when I was in high school, and I went to see my guidance counselor, and they basically were saying, you should go to community college, which, now is a great avenue. Back then, it was almost like you weren't smart enough for university. So when I think about it now, being in this position as a guidance counselor, and especially with our black youth, you're trying to get to know them, figure out what they want to do, but make sure they're following their dreams. So I just got a couple stories as a elementary school teacher. So when I was at this school, I was setting up my classroom. So if you're a teacher, you go in early, a week before school's over, summer's over, set up your classroom. So I'm literally in my classroom, And a colleague comes along who I haven't met yet and says, basically, do I have keys to open her classroom? So I'm like, no, I don't have keys. You might want to check with the janitor. So obviously she assumed that I was a janitor. Then the same day, walking down to the office, and one of the teachers I knew, and I was talking to her in the hallway, and the secretary came out and said, I didn't know you were working at the hospital and you're working here. So she assumed that I was like an orderly at the hospital and I was a janitor. And this is the secretary. And then finally, the EAL teacher, English as a second language, came to me and basically blatantly asked me, if I was a janitor. And I was like, no, I'm the grade 1 teacher here. And, this is my first year here. So after all this happening in one day, we had our first, your staff meeting at the beginning of the year. And I asked the principal and the vice principal, I said, can I say something before you guys start? And they were kind of reluctant. And I told them what happened. I explained to them what happened, right? And, both, white, female administrators. And they were like, well, can we deal with it in a different way? And I was like, no, I feel the need. I got to speak this. And so after they do their quick intro or whatever, I stand up and I said, on 3 separate occasions this week, I was assumed to be the janitor, right? And I said, I'm an educator, trained educator, and people who are my colleagues see me as, the janitor. So if you're looking at me as a black man in the school, all I can be is the janitor, what are you thinking about our students, right? And we know, I'm going to be straight, I'm going to be honest, talking about being courageous. We know the education system is racist. It's not set up for our kids. Now, being a person who's working in the education system, that's a tough goal because we're trying to obviously make it better. But, when we talk about racism, people can, like you said, individually, but when you talk about systemic racism, that's really hard to dismantle. And, we're still working at it. I'll give you another story. So as a parent, like the pastor said, I have 2 small boys. One's 9. When he was, I think he was 7, 2 years ago. And basically, this white girl in his class, I'm laughing, but it's really not funny, called him a burnt chicken McNugget. I don't know if you've ever been on YouTube. If you Google burnt chicken McNugget, there's a little black kid singing a 6-second song that he's saying he's a burnt chicken McNugget. That's a whole nother conversation. So she calls my son that. And so my son comes home and tells me that. And I'm now as a guidance counselor, so I have to go in and talk to, the men and basically, because I want my son to feel safe, even though he's in a system that's really not safe for him, to be honest. And I go talk to the guidance counselor, and she eventually calls the young girl's family, and basically the young girl now doesn't want to apologize. She's crying, and I don't want to force apology. So they end up, she writes a letter basically just apologizing. And like I said, at age 7, so like Josh talked about how even at 8, primary and elementary, they're being basically bombarded, being, looked at, perceived as less than valued. And, when I think again about the education system and, the Black Report and the reality check and all these stats that we've have, and we know that, the system, that system, is not set up for our kids. It's tough to go, into the school daily, and even as an educator and being seen as, less than valued by your colleagues. And like Josh said, they expected him to be an expert to have these conversations. So this year, there's a big emphasis on anti-Black racism, PD, professional development at our school. And so I'm the only Black staff at my school. And so the first time when we did our PD back in September, I said, I'm just going to sit here and see what these people say. And so we're talking about, how are we racist, and then we talked about solutions and stuff like that. And I'm sitting, listening, and I'm starting to boil up. And when I think of that, I think of my good friend, Mr. Adams. And I'm like, okay, we're having these conversations that I know basically exist. And, you know, we get tired of telling that story over and over. And then finally I stand up and like, okay, we've been talking about this stuff and you guys don't experience it. I experience it every day. I said, you know, let's talk about how we can make it better. And so again, now I think we had our third PD now. And, you know, and I know it's not going to change overnight. I get that. But it's funny in 2021 that we're still having these conversations about, you know, a system that people don't believe is racist. Like, that's the first thing, admitting that the system is racist, and then we can go from there. That's all I have to say.
Oh, there's a lot more you have to say, but I'm going to pull it over to you with these questions because the congregation gave us some powerful, poignant questions tonight. Thank you as well for sharing your lived truth, your lived reality. Pastor Andrea, it's yours, sis.
So I want to talk about my experience in the employment world. Some folks might say, well, Andrea, you know, you're light-skinned. Well, you know the rule, one drop of black and you're black. And so for me, when I first started out for my career, I was in government. I did not have a degree at the time. And I remember there was an opportunity that had arisen, and I was actually doing the work. And I was told point blank, I'm sorry, there's no way you'll ever be promoted. You'll never have any more opportunities than what you currently have because you don't have a degree. But yet, the person who got the job was white and didn't have a degree. So I quit that day. I was courageous, so I quit that day, and I left and went back to school to get a degree. Years later, I come back to the same organization, and I have to come back as a clerk. And I watched 3 other white individuals be promoted into a professional position who did not have a degree. And I remember one day that we had what we call a PSC all day, where all the staff from the organization, the very organization that I'm with right now, came together and they were having a discussion. And the commissioner of the day was very proud and stood up and said, I just want to let everybody know about the strides that we're making with regards to diversity and equity. He said, our numbers have gone up, and I'm looking around this room of 300 people, and I only see 2 of us. So there's a problem. And I'll never forget that day. My mother was a real advocate back in the day for justice. She used to work for the Black United Front, and she was very courageous. And I remember that day sitting in that room and saying, God, give me the courage to speak. Give me the courage to speak. And before I knew it, I was on my feet. And I said to the commissioner, I said, excuse me, sir. I said, I listened to you talk about statistics, and maybe the numbers have gone up. I said, but they're all in clerks, and we're not in this room. And he didn't know what to say. So in that moment, I put my current boss on the spot, and I said, but I'm grateful for my boss that's here today because I know she's intending to open the door for me for opportunities. Well, I set them up. They didn't have no choice but to promote me. So, so the next thing I know, the next competition that came around, I actually was promoted into that competition as a result of that. I want you to know, like, I've been an advocate for black people within government from the time I put my foot in that door. If somebody said there was an issue, and particularly in the profession that I'm in as an HR, is to be able to have those courageous conversations and challenge people on their practices. I mean, some of the things that I have seen over the course of my career, the biases and how people hire and how they screen resumes. You know, is that a black name? That sounds like a name from North Preston. Oh, they would actually ask me, do you know that name? Do you know that person? Well, I knew right then and there, the only reason they were asking me because their intention was to screen them out so they would never get an interview. I mean, these are just some of the experiences that I've had. And I mean, I think about some of the employees that have called me up and talk about their experiences and how when it comes to interviewing, preparing, and promotion opportunities, it's a sad state that we have to go through in the employment field. And this is a huge organization, but I'm grateful today that, you know, to have somebody in that organization that really has admitted, you know what, Andrea, we are a racist, and we accept that we are racist, and we need to do something about it to change. And that was because, you know, I remember we had a wellness check-in after George Floyd died, and thank goodness for Lady Kesa and Sister Tracy, who brought the black employees together to have a conversation. And I'll never forget it. That night, I was crying profusely about the whole thing. And I had a conversation with the commissioner. I started texting her and saying, what are we going to do? And then she called me up and she said, would you come and speak to the deputy ministers? And that Monday morning, that's when I just got so courageous, I couldn't even believe it myself, that just to begin to have that conversation about the impact that racism was having on individuals in the government of Nova Scotia, and something had to change. And so I'm just grateful that, that after the nominations for Casey and I and some of the other changes that took place, I'm hopeful for the first time in a very, very long time. And I get emotional thinking about when I think about some of the people and some of the journeys that they've had, but for the first time in a long time, I feel a sense of hope.
It's not too often. I don't know where to go or what to say. This has been beyond my expectation already. And y'all haven't even addressed any. Thank you for sharing. I could not help but recount graduating from Charles P. Allen High School and going to the recruiting center. I knew I wanted to join the military. My big brother was in the military. I saw him in uniform. Mama said, I don't have no money for you to go to school. Go to the military, they'll pay you. And so I went down there all bold and courageous, and they told me I could be a bosun, someone to maintain the ships and clean the ships. I said, no, I don't want to do that. Well, how about infantry? You can carry a gun. No, I don't want, no, I want to go into business. I got accepted at Dal. I want to do a Bachelor of Commerce. I want to be a logistics officer. How about a fin clerk? Start off as a finance clerk. 18, I didn't know any better, so I became a finance clerk. Thankfully, 2 years later, one of my senior clerks said, you're in commerce, why are you not applying to be an officer? Get your behind back down to Duke Street at the recruiting center. And it was then that I got accepted into the ROTP program, and D&D paid for the rest of my education to become an officer, a commissioned officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's happening even today. And so thank you for bringing that to life, because we have youth in our youth ministry that say they changed their street address on their resume, hoping just to get, right? And so one of the questions that came in, listen, we have 2 pages of questions, and so it's open, it's free. Whoever feels the unction to jump in, and if Casey says something that Josh says, I like that, I have something to add. Y'all, this is free flowing. We get to eavesdrop on your conversation tonight. One of the comments that was submitted was, can you please describe one of your earliest memories when you saw the world through a racial lens?
Oh, I can answer that.
Oh boy, okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. My earliest one was I was in elementary school, and I had a white friend who invited me to come home with her one day. And I got on the bus to go home with her, and when I showed up at her house, her mom said, if you think that nigger is coming in here, you got another thought coming. I was 7 years old, and I had to leave and walk all the way home by myself. That was the first time I really knew how different I was and that I did not belong.
That's terrible. Similar, but not as dramatic. I was out, it's probably a similar age, 7, 8. My friends and I would always play in the woods and stuff, and alone. We never had parents around. But one of my best friends at the time made a joke about how I looked like I had smeared poop all over myself. That was a bad one.
You know, it's interesting, even when we speak the words, the trauma's still there.
Yes.
That's how many years ago? I'm 60 years old. And I'm saying that, and the moment I say it, I start to weep because the trauma is still pain. The trauma is still there.
We live with this trauma. And people would say, why do you get so emotional when you watch an event that happened in the United States of America? This is Canada, Leonard. You're not down there. You weren't. But Mr. Floyd represent my uncle. Could be my cousin, could be my brother, could be me. This is the skin that we're in. This is the reality of our story. So thank you. I did not know if anyone else wanted to comment on that one question about a memory when you saw the world through a racial lens.
Yeah, I don't have an early one, but I have one. Me and my brother were helping my aunt move from Halifax to Dartmouth, and we drove across the bridge, and we got stopped. And I asked the police officer why he stopped me. He said something about my headlight or something. And my brother, if anybody knows my brother, he goes from 0 to 60 quickly. So he's in the back, and he's like, officer, what you stop me for? And the officer basically, after his preamble, basically said, what, you're not used to getting stopped? You haven't been arrested before?
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd like to share from a different perspective because I grew up in a majority black country. And so you would think that, that I would have a different perspective, and I do. But it's interesting in that race is a color, it's also a consciousness, and it's a culture. So you can have whiteness as a skin color, whiteness as a consciousness, and also whiteness as a culture. And so when I reflect on my upbringing in a majority black country that was once a colonial nation, owned by the British until 1973, I reflect on even whiteness as a consciousness. And the legacies of colonialism are real, even when you grow up in a majority black country. So when you think about aspects of hearing and just knowing that the lighter your complexion, even if you are black, the better. And that you would be seen as able to have access to more with lighter skin. So I think about that, and even as a little girl, growing up black little girl in the Bahamas, and you just hear, you hear the rhetoric, and you hear the language of the day, and you just know that if you're lighter complected, then you're prettier. If you're lighter complected, then you're seen as smarter. And then I reflect on the fact, too, that our country, the main industry is tourism. And so, this constant idea and preaching and just knowing that everybody's preparing the country for tourists who tend to be majority white people, right? And it's this service to others. And I reflected back and I thought, okay, what about us? Like, it's our country. It should be preparation for us. Now, don't get me wrong, there was also a black consciousness that was raising up in the country in the early years after independence. And I'm a 70s baby, as Pastor always says. I was born in 1976, so I was born 3 years after independence. So I gained the benefit of seeing the country shift in consciousness as well towards that black is beautiful, black power, etc. But I want to reflect on a conversation. I came home after, I think it was my first or second year in university, and our neighbor, a black woman, of course, and she was a janitor in a school. My mother is a teacher. And she had come home and she was downtrodden and she was heavy burdened and she was crying. And she was saying, somebody complained, one of the teachers, all black teachers, complained about her classroom and her classroom not being as clean as it needed to be. And she said to my mother, and I will never forget this, she said, Miss Monroe, if I can clean I clean for white people, and if I can clean for white people, then I must be able to clean, right? So it tells you even that consciousness raising that I had to examine as I was growing up in this majority black country because of these legacies of enslavement and legacies of colonialism, which still impact us and impact us here in Nova Scotia as well. So I think that's important for us to understand, that even when there are folks who come from majority black countries, there's still that legacy of colonialism, and for my country, the legacy of slavery.
I also have a story. So this was like, I was probably 10 years old, right? I was at my cousin's, and we were down the street at her neighbor's. We were playing Foursquare. And if you know Foursquare, it's like peasant, jester, queen, king. It's 4 rankings. You can go to anyone at any time. And I wasn't in this game. I was playing a different game at the time, but I was in the area. So my cousin, she got up. I don't know how to say it. Like, she was supposed to be king at the time, right? So she got to the position where she was to be king, and then a boy who was white said to her, "You can't be king." And she's black, right? So he said, "Why not?" And he said to her, "Because you're African." And when I heard this, I wanted to fight the kid. Like, I was so mad. He didn't say it to me, but that's my family. He's not allowed to talk to my family like that. And she calmed me down. The situation was dealt with. But that was at a young age. She was saying because she was African, she couldn't be king. So.
And this is a game.
Yeah.
Right. I often say that race is not a card that we play. It's a life that we live. Some people think we would use it as a trump card. Oh, just because you didn't get promoted, you throw the race card. It's because or because I got an F on the test. Oh, it's because no. If I deserve the F, give me the F. But if I deserve the promotion, give me the promotion. Right? It's just a skin. One of the other questions was, why is it wrong to say, I don't see color? I thought that was helpful. Now, I mentioned something like that in my sermon this morning, but hopefully that you weren't here and you didn't hear that. So I want to ask you, our esteemed panelists, this is one of our congregants. This is a member of our church wanting to know, I thought I was helping by saying, I don't see color. I see you as Andrea, a woman of God, my sister in Christ. What's wrong when I say I don't see color?
I think I'd like to take that one.
Okay.
If you don't see color, then you don't really see me as I am, as a black woman. So if you say to me, Kesa, I don't see your color, what I'm hearing is you are erasing my history. You're erasing my heritage. It's erasure of even the injustices that black people in general have endured over the course of history. What you're essentially saying is you're invisible. None of those injustices happen, and you really don't matter. That's essentially what you're saying. And I do know that folks are wanting to be, or feeling that they're being kind, and they feel that they're actually not being racist by using that phrase, but in fact you are being and demonstrating a behavior that is racist, because I'm receiving that as an isolating speech.
It means that you don't see the trauma. Like, I just shared something I never shared with anyone. And despite what I was saying in my childhood, that I just wanted to be me, I never saw myself as being black, and that sort of idealist notion that we are simply human. We are no different, or so little is different biologically between all of us. But it is not acknowledging my lived experience and the trauma that comes with something as insignificant as color.
So it's not helpful. Okay.
Actually, I would say it's harmful. It's beyond not helpful. It's extremely harmful, Because if you erase me, then you are not recognizing my very humanity, as a brother said. And if I'm not human to you, then what am I?
That's good. I know when I spoke with the Nova Scotia Health Authority and someone made that comment, I alluded to it this morning in my sermon. I said, so do you stop at a red light? Do you go at a green light? And they said, yes. I said, oh, so you do see color. You just choose the color you want to see. They didn't see me coming, right? So that's thank you so much for this. This is helping me. I want to ask this question because we had a little conversation. I cut it off short because I didn't want y'all to show us your hand, but it was very obvious that this has a generational tint to it. I understand, this came from one of our congregants, I understand the offensive word, but I am wondering why the differences referencing Negro versus African American, now the term black seems to be appropriate. Wondering why the changes throughout the years. But more importantly, why do rappers use that very offensive word that people have strived to erase and fight against? Why is it okay for rappers to use it? Because I find it offensive.
Well, generationally, I don't think it is appropriately. Because I say, when you think about where that word comes from and what the history behind it, once again, the trauma, thinking about what people went through, and that the fact that it is used in a way to so derogatory. And so for me, I think it is inappropriate, and call that generational or not, it's a problem for me, because it continues to traumatize a group of people that have been completely traumatized throughout history. So I do think it's inappropriate for that reason.
I think there's some kind of twisted thinking that they're trying to rebrand the word, like my dog, my brother. But that's just twisted thinking, you know?
Sorry, I was told it's used as a term of endearment.
Yeah.
And I know that in, well, I assume the South of the United States, that it is an attempt to reclaim the word, to turn it into something positive, something that, a weapon that was used, turn it into something that could not be used against them anymore. Under the lens of Nova Scotia, I don't see where it could ever really be appropriate to use here. Because in my mind, it only signifies connection to slavery and offense. The only reason why someone would use it here is to offend.
I don't think it should be permissible anywhere. I am one of those people who's absolutely against the use of the N-word. I don't believe it's reclaimable. I don't believe you can sanitize a word that that has been used to kill. It has been used, and it's still being used. We heard the stories tonight. It's still being used. And I believe we need to re-examine and examine ourselves, whether we're people of African descent or not, who are using the word, because I believe that lends to internalized racism. So we do understand, like I said, you know, there's racism as race as a culture, as a consciousness, as well as a color. And we also understand that identity, and you were talking about it earlier, Brother Joey, that our identity is not only what we think we are, who we feel we are. Identity is partially who we think we are and what we think we are, but our identity is also projected on us from society. Society and others around us, our family, our friends, media, etc. They tell us who we are. Now it's up to us as self-determined people or not to accept parts of that, but a lot of that is even impressed upon us forcibly as Black people. And for other people of color, the same. So when we talk about internalized racism, then, it would be me as a Black woman believing the stereotypes, believing the biases about Black people, and then turning against myself as a Black woman and saying, I believe all the negative things that the society projects about me and to me, I receive them, and in my response, I hate myself. And I hate others who look like me. And I disassociate myself from my Black culture, my Black color, and my Black consciousness. I don't have a Black consciousness. I choose to have a white consciousness. I decenter myself as far away from Blackness as possible, and I center myself in whiteness and what whiteness represents. And so when we think about the use of the N-word, I think that's a conversation that, you know, I think that's an important conversation that we as Black people need to have. I don't think, again, because enslavement was a global phenomenon. Global, not just in the Americas. The world benefited or were disadvantaged by enslavement. So I don't think there is a piece of land anywhere, or water for that matter, that could say, you know, we could be, you know, excluded from the trauma of that word.
Agreed.
He said, agreed. Yeah, ditto. Another question came in. I am guilty of being a bystander in conversations where people are making racist comments about Black people, but because they are my family members, or close friends, I don't know how to address these strong views. How do you suggest I deal with these situations?
I think you have to deal with it because I believe that we are in a time where white people have to build their stamina to be able to engage in conversations about racism. And in that particular situation, I think that person has to confront, and one of the big things is that the responsibility to learn themselves, to be able to engage in that conversation with their family members. And, you know, Rachel Sellers, she did a session, and she talked about her struggle with her family because she comes from a biracial family, and how her family were making these comments. But she said she had to step up and have a brave, courageous conversation with her family members and tell them the real deal about racism and its impact. I think that each person has an obligation, a responsibility, and an accountability to engage in those conversations in a courageous way for the purpose of change.
Personally, I think that silence is just not an option. It's like, if you're gonna be silent, you're gonna allow the behavior to continue, and you're helping to lead on and continue the misconceptions and the ignorant thinking that they believe, you know?
I'd add to that I agree with both what Pastor Andrea, and as well what you said, Josh. And I believe that folks need to stay engaged, because it's too easy to disengage from those conversations when they're people that we love and people that we don't want to offend, but they are being very offensive in what they're saying. And I oftentimes hear people say, well, you know, that person is older. You know, I often hear that excuse. If they're older, well, you know, there's no change in them now, just let them go ahead. And I disagree with that. I believe that we need to speak to them with grace, but we need to stay engaged. We also need to speak our truth. We need to speak our truth. We need to speak to them in love, but speak from our own experiences and our own knowledge to them. We need to also expect, you know, that we won't solve the problem right then and there with one conversation. And then that loops right back to staying engaged. So if we expect, you know, if I have this one conversation with this particular racist relative of mine, you know, over Christmas dinner or Easter dinner or whatever gathering, the family barbecue, and it's going to be done. No, it's going to take time, and you need to stay engaged in not that one conversation, but those series of conversations. And, you know, in the same way that we would provide information to somebody else that we love for a point that we wanted to get across, there's so many different ways that we can, you know, send a video, we can send, you know, maybe you want to read this book, you know, maybe there's this lecture going on, there's this courageous conversation on race at Emmanuel Baptist, you can tune in from your sofa. There's so many different ways that we can provide information, and then also be willing to experience discomfort. Because part of that is that we don't want to be uncomfortable, we don't want to be rejected by this family member, but we have to realize that that moment of discomfort, if you're not a black person, that's the life of a black person. Every moment of the day is a life of discomfort because we are always having to skirt around and navigate the life of a black person in a white world, essentially. So that moment of discomfort, you should be able to endure that when you think about the life of discomfort that black people live.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add this book, which is called This Book is Anti-Racist. Talks about 20 lessons on how to wake up, take action, and do work. So in this book, it talks about...
Can you, maybe they can zoom in on it? There you go. Wow, we got camera people. Look at them. Wow, y'all earning your pay.
So it talks about call in or call out. And as Casey said, call in is having a private conversation with a member, could be family, could be even at your work, or call out when you actually have to call somebody out in public about their, you know, the racist point of views. So those would be the two ways I would suggest.
That's so, it sounds easy, but it's simple. Call in or call out, but do something. You mentioned anti-racist. One of the questions here is, well, I'm a non-racist, or I'm not racist. So what does anti or anti-racist mean? Is there a difference?
Well, I believe that everyone is racist to a certain degree. Everyone has their own biases and preferences and things. So to think that one is not racist might be a little naive. Anti-racism. Kesa, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I do. You know what? It's funny. Not funny. When I was working on my PhD and I was selecting my theoretical perspectives, anti-racism was one that I chose. And I remember a conversation with someone else who was in the class with me, and the conversation was like, I don't want to be anti-anything. And I was like, what? You need to be anti-this. You need to be anti-this. There's no non-this. It's anti, absolutely against racism. All forms of racism, absolutely against it. And there's no way to be anti-racist without action. So, you know, the former question, the question right before this one that talked about, well, you know, what do you do? Well, you got to do something. Nike says just do it. Just do it. Find a way to act, because you cannot be anti-racist without action. Now, non-racist, well, maybe you can be without act. Maybe you don't need to act with being non-racist. I don't really know what that is. All I know is when you're anti-racist, you are centering race in the conversation. So you are centering race. So, you know, sometimes you want to talk about race, and the people are like, well, what about gender? Well, what about the poor people? Well, what about the LGBTQ plus community? Well, what about, like, no, we're centering race. We're putting race in the center, and we're leaving it in the center. Now, all of those other aspects are various other forms of oppression that intersect with race, and so we can layer our conversation. However, when we're talking about race, we're oftentimes too quick to decenter race because, again, we're not comfortable. Well, a lot of times people aren't comfortable. They can't talk about race too long. We got to move on to something else quickly. No, let's sit in our discomfort and put race in the center of the room. And then we need to act. And when you're anti-racist, here's another piece about that. You cannot be anti-racist and not engage the communities of people who are racialized. There is no way you can be anti-racist and sit in your corner, particularly as a white person, and not engage black communities. Impossible. You are not anti-racist if you're doing that. You must not speak for black communities. You must speak with black communities as an ally. You must not take the knowledge of black people and call it your own. You must center the knowledge of black people, make the space for black people with the knowledge to come to the center. That's, anti-racist is a whole, like you need a whole conversation on that, Pastor, because we can't go through all
That's
this.
the next panel. That's the next panel. Y'all are doing good. Y'all take a little sip, have a little drink, deep breath. Right? Joshua, I love when you talked about breaking the silence, because I don't think there's a speech I give when asked to go outside of this house that I don't mention Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who said, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. We're asking you as our community of faith, as members at our church, EBC, we celebrate our multiculturalism, we celebrate the diversity, we celebrate all the denominations, but when there's an opportunity to be an ally, we need you to act. I'm supposed to be asking questions, I'm sorry. I digress. I did not grow up with black people, and I didn't learn anything about their history, contributions, culture, or growing up. Where do I go? And what resources should I seek out to learn more so that I can be more informed and equipped to respond responsibly to anti-black racism?
I would say to that, if the doctor gave you a diagnosis and told you that you had a sickness, the first thing you would do is you would go on the internet and you would find all the information you could find. You would go to the library and you would find as much information as you could possibly find. So I think the first thing that folks need to do is to treat this like this is a diagnosis. Well, it is a diagnosis. It's a diagnosis of racism. And you have an obligation and a responsibility to find out about it. There are lots of resources. You don't have to look far. You want to know about the Atlantic slave trade? Just go on the internet. There's all kinds of information there. You want to know about Emmanuel Baptist Church and this community and the journey that this community has been through and the racism and the things that they've encountered even as a community? You can hear that online. It's all there. And being a member of Emmanuel Baptist Church, I think it's imperative for folks that are in this congregation to have a really good insight and understanding about the journey of this community and its black people. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I mean, listen, the bookstores have displays out front. 25 different books you can read. And so I think there's lots of opportunities. I think people are, sometimes it's an excuse, I just don't know where to go. Well, if you wanted information, you would find it.
To what Pastor Andrea said, read the books. You can read books by black authors. Talk to black people, learn about their experiences, hear about their perspectives. You can watch documentaries. There's a documentary I'm currently watching with my family. It's called Africa's Great Civilizations, and it's excellent. It showcases like the true history of Africa, that we come from kings and queens, and we come from royalty. You can visit the Black Cultural Center, go to Africville. You can even go to the library and participate in events regarding black history.
Right. That is amazing. Listen, you're never too young to learn. Someone said, well, I don't want to scare our kids. So, telling these stories at the very end, because some of the principals, Pastor Leonard, what are you going to say when you come in? Because I said, listen, if my children are young enough to experience it, your child is young enough to learn about it. This is it. Y'all know we family. Jordan and Caleb are on the bus. This is a dated story, but they're on the bus coming from Hammonds Plains. Our children, sorry, I got to go home. Our children are on the bus, and they're coming from Hammonds Plains Consolidated School, and they're going home, and Caleb gets up to get off the bus, and the bus driver would not let them off the bus. And Caleb said, my house is there. No, you don't live in this. Don't you live in Park Walk? Just the assumption that because he looked like me, you wouldn't have a house in this subdivision. This is why I'm saying, so how? But here's one of the questions. Can you please speak to families raising biracial children? What would you say to them? What's important for them to instill in their children? I'm just, let's all chime in on it. But what would you say to them, and what's important for them to instill into their children?
One thing that my wife and I have decided to do very specifically is make sure that our children can identify with both of their parents. And even though, in the case of my children, they can pass for being white most of the time, that there are ways for them to, on the outside, identify with their father. So braid their hair, who braids their hair, where they go to church to learn about the communities that are around them. Just
that's helpful.
The things that I didn't have growing up, make sure that they have.
Yeah, and I have biracial grandchildren. So, my grandson, Jackson, can pass. And he even told me, he said, well, Nanny, no, I'm not black. Look at my skin. And so, Glenn and I have to start having conversations with him because he does go to school now, and he needs to know that his dad is black and his mom is white. So it's engaging him in that, and then the books, the stories that his dad has purchased for them to read, there are stories with black kids in it. And so he gets to understand who he is. And so I think that's important that you when they're biracial, that you do introduce them to their black culture so that they don't walk around naive. I think that's important. So yeah, that's what we've been doing, is introducing them to books and having conversations, explaining to them why he looks the way he looks, how that came to be, and all that good stuff. So yeah.
In the furtherance of the fight to end racism, generationally, it is very important for our biracial children to be our best advocates, because like my daughter will live in a sphere that I could not, and you and I could not. And the conversations that she will have won't be the same because they will assume the opposite and be able to confront those people differently.
Thank you so much. Beloved, our time is almost up, and I just appreciate your willingness to be here and to journey with us. A lot of emotions came to the surface tonight. There are two questions before I try to summarize our time together. One is, what are some unconscious biases you experience from white people that you would like them to know? What are some unconscious biases or even microaggressions?
Well, for me, being in the workplace, I would say one of them is that hiring people who look like you. So immediately, that's what happens in the workplace. They want to hire people that look like them. Another unconscious bias is that they don't realize, because they have relationships with whites and they don't engage and seek to have relationships with blacks, that they always tend to hire like people. I think another one for me is that unconscious bias I see is in meetings. I'm not heard in the meetings. So I may have a great idea, and I would say, hey, what about blah, 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 blah? Nobody hears that. But when a white person steals my idea, because that's what it is, they steal my idea and they bring it up, all of a sudden, oh, that's a great idea, Sally. I'm so glad you thought about that. Well, so those are some of the things that I've experienced. One of the other things is I think about, when you go to a staff event and watch where everybody goes when they walk into the room. They don't come your way. They go over with their white friends who look like them. And so those are some of the experiences that I have had when it comes to unconscious bias.
I can add to that. What I've experienced in the workplace before is regarding more than one black person being in the hallway, in the lunchroom. There's the assumption that you're up to something. What are you doing? And students also, black students, experience the same thing in the hallways at school. More than one black student, what are you doing? You're up to something. There's a whole group, like a pack of white students over there, but no one's questioning them. Also, myself as an adult, I'm not capable of being a leader. I'm not seen as a leader because it's assumed that you need to stay in your place. And your place as a black woman is not in leadership. In fact, I remember maybe about 6 years ago that there was a woman in leadership in an organization that I was working in, and I had applied again for, I think it was a supervisory position at that time, and pretty much what I was told was, there, dare, that's not for you, that's not for you, there, dare. And I hope that person is watching tonight. Then also, I have an experience of, with, and Pastor and I, with, I believe it was Micah in a parent-teacher. So there's this assumption that black parents are not concerned about their children's education, and that black people in general don't care about education. And so here it is, a parent-teacher meeting, and we both show up, as we did. And we walk in, and the teacher's like, oh, there's two of you. Like, yeah, it takes two to make a baby. Yep, we're here. We're both here. Hi, hello. Got seats for both of us? So they were surprised that we were there. And I think there's also that assumption that maybe most black students are from single-parent families as well, or, so there are all these assumptions that we see played out in various aspects of life.
Yeah, just to add to that, sorry, Josh. As a teacher coming up through the system, I was always asked if I was, or assumed to be the gym teacher, right? And relating to sports, even you see the assumption that, as playing sports, that it's based on our athletic ability as opposed to our skill level. And even going further as a coach, like that we're not smart enough to coach a team, and you see that, basically in all the major sports, like how many black coaches we have in the major sports.
A few things I would like to add are, sometimes people think that I listen to rap music just because I'm black. I've also been asked, like, where do you live in Dartmouth? You live in Dartmouth? And not to say that Dartmouth is a bad place, it's a great place, but because the majority of the black people, the majority of the black population in Dartmouth and Halifax lives in Dartmouth. So they just assume that I was from there. Also, if I'm like in school and I want to sit by a group of my friends who are black, teachers, they always assume something's up, like what you were saying. They always try to like stop something before they think something's gonna happen, even though there's nothing happening, right? And also, teachers are like often surprised when that I'm well-spoken and, okay, sorry, I don't mean it like that. I mean, teachers are often surprised that I'm articulate and that I care about my studies and stuff. And people ask me, like teachers ask me, what sport I play before talking about school. And they think I play basketball too. I do, but before even asking me, they think I already play sports,
One for me would be that my name doesn't necessarily match the community I belong to. So I will talk on the phone and I'll introduce myself. I work on the phone a lot. But then when I see my clients come to me in person, they treat me differently once they see me. The other thing that Lady Kesa was mentioning was the microaggressions. They're not, individually, one doesn't see them as acts of racism. Like for me, one of the more hurtful things in my life has been just people looking at me. And one person looking at me when I enter a room isn't racism, but when everybody does, all at the same time, it's very dramatic. One time, same girlfriend as I was talking about before, I entered a store, and I mentioned before entering the store for her to watch and see what happens and come in behind me. And I entered the store, and she stopped in the doorway because everybody in the store stopped what they were doing and simply turned. And it was like a wave, and she had never seen it before until I mentioned it. So it's not so much the big things, the burning cross on your lawn. It is the little things that everyone can do.
Yeah. It's me going through the border into the United States, and they ask for my driver's license, and they see Nova Scotia, so I'm asked, so how close is this to Preston? I'm in Ontario going into Buffalo. Just because I had my niece in the back. It's being in the jewelry store in Bedford and looking at a ring, and the clerk say, there may be something down here more appropriate for your wallet. What do you know is in my wallet? It just, you can't make this up. You can't, this is not a figment of my imagination. I'm not paranoid, but this is us. Last question, because y'all been so good and I'm not even paying you. Oh my gosh. I'll take you over for a coffee, Tim's or something, Starbucks. All right. Why is it so difficult for church folk to talk about race? What are some of the barriers to having this important conversation? I know the person would say, Pastor, why did it take you 21 years of being here before we had this time? Why is the church fearful?
I was going to say, so I think the reason we're fearful is that one of the things is people don't want to be seen as being racist. And so if you engage in it, see, because from their perspective, a racist person is a bad person. And if I say I'm racist, that assumes I'm a bad person. And then a lot of times folks will think that because I'm not KKK, I'm not the white supremacy, so therefore I am not racist. But don't understand what racism truly is and the impact of it. And I think that that's why we don't engage. People are not comfortable engaging in these conversations. And I think we're at a place for Emmanuel Baptist Church where I really see that this is the first of many conversations on the go forward. Like Lady Kesa said, a conversation about anti-racism all in itself, anti-black racism. It's hard to cover these all in this kind of thing, but I think as we go forward, we'll definitely have to engage in those. But I think that's the discomfort, is that people see the word when you say that they're racist, that they're bad people. And there's a system that we live in that we need to address and talk about systemic racism. And not individual racism, the individual acts of racism. There's systemic racism, and people don't want to talk about it on an individual level. So anyways, I'll leave that for someone else to carry on.
So the church is a system.
Right.
The church is a system, and sorry to tell you, but even though we should be separate and apart from the world, we are in the world. And because systemic racism and individual racism and every other form of racism, they're present in society. We live in society. We have been brought up by society. So racism is in the church. Call your friend if they didn't know and let them know it's in the church. So because it's in the church, and that's not news to us today, the reason the AUBA, the African United Baptist Association, exists is because of systemic racism. The reason why there's such a thing as a black church and black communities are because of systemic racism. So when we consider the history of churches, not in the United States, but right here in Nova Scotia, then we must admit that racism is a real thing, not for everybody out there, outside the walls of the church, but for us within this system called the church. And so the first way we need to, we need to demolish the barriers that prevent us from having these conversations is first admit that anti-black racism is real, that it exists. And I believe that that was already mentioned earlier tonight, because denial that anti-black racism exists will be a barrier to these conversations occurring in the future and continuing. The second barrier would be a presumption of entitlement. Presumption that whatever I have, whatever I have accomplished as a person who's not black, it's all due to my hard work, my determination, and my merit. So everything I have is nothing to do with the color of my skin. So unless we admit that white privilege is real and active and impacting positively on people who are white and anybody who can pass as white, then we will not be able to continue these conversations in a productive way. And then the last barrier I would mention is some folks say, well, I don't need to change. Everybody out there needs to change. So if you're a person who feels that it's not on me, I'm not the one burning the cross on the lawn, I'm not the one using the N-word and spray painting the N-word on a public building, if that's your belief, then there's no way these conversations can continue. But if you're open to the fact that you are and you do have a relationship with white supremacy, this book, Me and White Supremacy, I urge you to read it. It's by Layla Saeed. Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor. My BED students read that last semester, 2 groups of them, and we used it in the commission as well for our work with police. And so what I want to say is we all have a relationship with white supremacy. The white supremacists are not just the KKKs. All of us have a relationship. Either we're benefiting from white supremacy or we're being disadvantaged by white supremacy. When we can admit that we all have a conversation with white supremacy, these conversations can continue. But until then we have to look at dismantling those barriers that I spoke to.
Yeah. It becomes a challenge, Lady Kesa, when you have white progressives who take a D&I course, a diversity and inclusion course, and so they think they know it all because, well, I know all of that, I took a course, and so it becomes a challenge to engage in a conversation with those individuals. So so that's another barrier for us. A person takes one course and they become the expert in anti-racism and racism, so, and then they shut down, and it's challenging to engage in conversations with them. Yeah.
So I would circle back to what anti-racism really means. Because I think the people that you're talking about, Pastor Andrew, would be those who are not black and who are not people of color,
That's
typically.
right.
And then I would encourage them to read White Fragility.
Right.
Okay, Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. Because when we look at white fragility and we think about anti-racism work, then you will be centering the voices of black people in that discussion and not thinking or projecting that you know it all, because it's not your lived experience.
I thank you so much. When we had our Zoom meeting, we said we don't know how we want to conclude, because the theme for this month was Black History Matters. Listen, learn, share, act. It was our challenge and our privilege tonight to listen. So we say thank you. I'm sure we learned a great deal. You shared your life experience, but the last action word is how can we act? Can you close us off? I don't know, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I would like to hear maybe if everyone speaks, and at least that gives us 5 actions, what would action look like to help move this needle forward? how can the listener, those members of our congregation, and the wider, because everyone's eavesdropping on this conversation tonight, they're saying, how can we act? How can we do better? How can we be an effective ally? What does action look like for you?
I would say, first of all, you have to challenge racist behaviors and practices. And just even looking in the school system and, where our black students are suspended more and put on individual program plans. And like you said, if they're just hanging out, so they're up to something. I think you got to challenge those practices and those behaviors. And, and for me, that means, call in, call out my colleagues, right?
Thank you.
I would say that you'd have to change your perspective. It's not about ending racism tomorrow. It's about moving that needle even just a little bit. Not all of us are going to become big activists, but just admitting that you don't understand, talking to a friend who you don't realize has experienced traumas, because every black person everywhere has experienced some sort of trauma, and we have a wide range of people up here in different experiences, and all have experienced trauma. So maybe a little vulnerability.
Thank you.
I would say from an employment perspective, if you're a hiring manager and you are watching, this is your opportunity to hire someone who represents Black African Nova Scotian, and make sure that your organization represents the communities that you serve. That's how you can act. It's time to change the face of the organization which you manage and have the power to do something differently to make a difference.
Thank you.
I would add to that if you're at any decision-making table and you're looking around the room and everyone looks like you, then you need to take that opportunity to center race and to ask the question, who's missing and why? If black people are not at that table, if our hands are not in the basket, then we don't have an opportunity to eat what's in that basket. And so you need to make it so that there's space at that table for all. And I have one more action before we go into Josh, which is when black people tell you their stories, believe us. Believe the stories. Do not say you're playing the race card. And if you think that, check yourself, check your bias, conscious or unconscious, check it, because that is very dismissive to the trauma of our experiences.
To close, to add on everything that we've said, educate yourself, examine your own biases and beliefs. As Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. Right. And good intentions that cause a negative impact mean nothing. They just cancel each other out. So you have to think ahead, Yeah.
Can you please show some love to this group? Come on, make some noise online. Make some noise online. Whoa, 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 whoa. It has been an absolute honor to take a position of humility and just listen. You've been very gracious tonight in allowing us to hear the pain in your voice and just the truth of your reality. Beloved, we haven't made the strides that we thought we have made. It's 2021, and still we have a long way to go, but our ancestors taught us a song, Facing the Rising Sun. Our new day has begun. Let's march on till victory is won. I challenge you today to take a step in the right direction. It's never about the speed, it's about the direction. So may we never stop working for a safer, more equal, more respectful community together. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And dehumanization is a violation to God's creation. We're made in the image of our Father. And we need you to affirm that and celebrate that and work with us because we're all God's children. Father, we thank you for this time together tonight. We thank you that there's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God that's in all and working through us all. We thank you for the prophets of Amos and Micah that told us that we need to seek justice, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. God, we pray that righteousness and justice will flow like a mighty rushing river. God, I pray that you would heal our land. Rain from heaven. Heal our land. Heal our hearts. Give us beauty for our ashes and joy for our mourning. We confess our sins and the error of our ways. We confess our misunderstanding and our prejudices. And God, we ask for your forgiveness as we confess our role that we have played, where we've built more walls than bridges. God, be our bridge builder. Be our way maker and our problem solver, and give us a boldness to break the silence so that we can fight on the right side of history. This is our prayer as we commit our church family to you, knowing that you're the Lord of the church and the gates of hell shall never prevail. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you till we have another panel. Who knows what we're talking about next? Bye-bye. God bless.
If the Lord
An onlooker. If my people unified and we'll begin to mobilize, and they gon' see the heat rising like a slow cooker. And there's no days out. We came a long way, but still a long ways out. I've been praying for change, but I'm all prayed out.